Startup Grind. For whom is this their first time on Startup Grind? Let's see. So awesome. Give these guys a little clap of applause. It's pretty great. There we go. Beautiful thing. For those that don't know, Startup Grind is a global startup community. I think it's the largest in the world. We're over 400 cities deep, 100 countries large. It's like the United Nations for founders. So I think about it. We've got people, it's interesting. You think about it, we have people in Iran and Israel and Palestine and Afghanistan. Every year they come together and they come to the sort of the global summit. It's like our United Nations General Assembly, and they talk about business and life and our allies. It's pretty amazing. And this happens all over the world. So wherever you're traveling, it's very likely we have a chapter there. But this is a very special chapter, one of our very first and still one of our most important. I like to think I'm a little biased. But we have a lot of folks to thanks to make this possible. And firstly, I'd like to say thank you to BeFast, through whom we're streaming this entire thing online. So if there are any friends who would love to be here but couldn't make it, shout out to BeFast. Thanks again for helping us put this together. Another really cool thing is, anyone here who has ever been to China? Yeah, we got a few hands. Awesome, right? Totally different marketplace, right? I gave you some nods here, right? It's like being on the surface of Mars relative to here. Different resources available, different competitive landscape. But if you're thinking about checking out China as a market, our friends at Brink, whom I know rather well personally, rather cool, are throwing a competition. If you would like to test out the Chinese market, you have an algorithm, a hardware product, whatever, and you're feeling brave about taking on the hostile shores of the Far East, this is a cool chance to apply brink.io/contest. If you're chosen, 3 folks actually get a flight out there. You get to present, do the whole thing. One team wins out 25 grand as part of an expansion plan. So good to check out. And lastly, for this wonderful space, I'd like to thank not just our friends at Silicon Valley Bank, but also the bank that I use. It's an awesome, awesome provider. For that, I want to bring James out to say a few words.
Thank you for the shout out. Hey everyone, my name is James Wilson. I'm with Silicon Valley Bank on our early stage team and wanted to welcome everyone to tonight's session. Quickly, can I get a show of hands? How many people are familiar with SVB or have heard of the bank? Oh, that's awesome. Cool. And how many founders in the room? All right, so we got a good number. Anyone client of the bank? Any of the founders? Oh, there you go. Awesome. So for those of you who don't know about SVB, we bank the tech and innovation sector. And in fact, we bank companies across their whole life cycle. So we like to say from seed through IPO and beyond. And my team especially works with really early companies. We do a lot of cool events for them. And we have quite a few banking products geared towards startups. So one example is something we're really excited about, which is a credit card product that we're piloting for startups. I'd love to chat with you guys and share more, so feel free to email me. My email is jwilson@svb.com. We'd also love for you to engage with us on social media, so please tweet about this event tonight. I've included handles for both Startup Grind and the bank, and I'd really encourage you to check out VC Corner on Medium or Twitter. It's this really neat series of Q&As that we've been doing with VCs. Most recently with Floodgate. Really excited about social media engagement. And lastly, really lucky to have Ryan here tonight with Proterra, which also happens to be an SVB client. And I'm going to pass the mic back to Mike to introduce Ryan and Joy tonight.
At the end. Cheers. Thank you, James. So before we introduce people, I want to introduce something very fun that we do here. We have a few of these cheesy traditions that we keep consistent across our Startup Grind chapters. And this is one of our no one's too cool brand of activities. So look to your left, look to your right, and there you go. You see some folks. We want to make sure that we get to help each other out in doing this thing. But here's a tradition. So we have these speakers. Many of them are running huge companies. Others are big investors. And they could be doing very, very valuable things with their time besides just being out here mentoring. So we like to make them feel like rock stars, because they kind of are. They're taking their time out of their schedule, and so we like to welcome them like they're rock stars. So if you're holding, a iPad, food, something else in your lap, might be a good time to put that down. You can do social media engagement later. Right now we're going to do some human engagement. And after I introduce our speakers, I would truly appreciate if not just you, but your friends next to you would get up out of your seats and give them a huge round of applause. Now let's look some eyes. Make sure you see each other. Can we do that? Yeah? Any no's? Awesome. I'll take that as an opt-in. He's kind of skeptical. Keep him honest, would you? Thank you. So with that said, it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome Joy. She is at Generation Investment Management, making some very profound impacts in green investing as part of Al Gore's investment arm. And then Ryan, who has been instrumental rolling out environmentally conscious zero-emission electric buses across the nation and now expanding into Canada. And so with that, would you guys please give Ryan and Joy a big round of applause?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Can't? Okay. If you can't hear me, please let me know. Hello, everyone. Really nice to be here, and I will let Ryan speak for most of it because he's got far more interesting things to say than I do. But at the initial stage, I wanted to introduce myself and introduce Generation because I know that not many people know who Generation is or what we do. Caveat, we're actually investors in Proterra. So we're very excited about Proterra. So big asterisks associated with what we're going to talk about today. So Generation was founded back in 2004. We are founded by two notable people. One is Al Gore, the former US Vice President, and then the second is a person called David Blood. He used to be the CEO of Goldman's asset management arm. And essentially what we're trying to do is prove the case that if you are to invest for the long term, you're going to have to incorporate sustainability issues. And those encompass both what a company is doing. So are they on the right side of history? Are they driving their industries towards a more sustainable, efficient, low carbon, and equitable way of doing things? And secondly, are they running their business in a sustainable way? Are the incentive structures for the management teams incentivizing long-term thinking? What are the governance structures like, and everything like that? So we have around $20 billion of assets under management. And on the growth equity side, where I sit, we're looking to invest anywhere from $20 million at the low end and up to $100 million at the upper end in growth stage companies across the world. We have offices in London and in San Francisco. So hello, everyone. And I'll let Ryan both introduce himself and give a bit more background on Proterra.
Sure. Thanks, Joy. And thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to a number of people who are in the startup community and founding things. I am not an early stage founder, so I can give you my thoughts on what happens in the later stages of your business, but with all due humility and respect, I have not been through what founders go through. I've spent a lot of time working with founders, and I pride myself on being a good business leader who's very supportive of founders, but I'm not an early stage entrepreneur. The founder of our company, Dale Hill, is still full-time with our company. He lets me be the CEO, I let him be the founder. And it works out pretty well. I really enjoy that aspect of our business. Most of my experience in the startup world has been relatively late stage. I joined Tesla just before the company went into revenue, or I thought it was just before the company was going to go into revenue. Revenue was a little bit farther away. I also joined right before the IPO, which turned out to not be right before the IPO, but that was fine. And then with Proterra, I joined in 2014. I left the investment firm that's one of the larger shareholders of Proterra and joined as the full-time CEO. So what I like to do, I tend to like to get involved in businesses that are large enough where you have multifunctional organizations. You've got a great technology, but you don't necessarily yet have a great business or a great company. So probably my favorite stage of a company is somewhere on the other side of $1 million of revenue. And right now I'm trying to push the sort of upper bound on Proterra in terms of how far I've gone with the company from a revenue perspective. Proterra is at about a $100 million run rate right now. So we're definitely very late in terms of the startup cycle, which is good, that's healthy. Proterra is a US-based technology and manufacturing company. We're an EV technology company. That implies that we have to do both hardware and software well. We manufacture a lot of our technology ourselves, which is not the most popular way to run a startup. But we were very early into our market, and a lot of the stuff that we needed just didn't exist from the supply chain. So we couldn't necessarily call up a contract manufacturer. And as much as software can add a lot of value in urban mobility, we definitely felt like a zero-emission, purpose-built vehicle was an essential part of the technology stack. So there's probably going to be a SaaS or mobile app company that sits on top of companies like Proterra someday. It'll probably be a much easier business to start than Proterra, but you're still going to need the Teslas and the Proterras there to get the ball rolling. In terms of state of the business, we have almost 500 employees and contractors now. It was about 200 when I started. And hundreds of employees is sort of what I'm used to. I don't know what it's like to be employee 1 or employee 10. I also don't know what it's like to be employee 1,000, so I'd say sort of the pre-1000 era. We've got product in probably 24 cities right now, including places like San Jose, Seattle, Chicago, Illinois, Park City, Utah. And we currently hold the world record for the longest range electric vehicle. We drove a 40-foot electric bus, 1,100 miles in a single charge. It was on a test track, but even on a test track, we would have lapped a Chevy Bolt or a Tesla Model S or anything else out there. So we're really trying to shatter any sort of preconceived notions that EV technology is only for small, hyper-efficient cars or only for expensive sports cars. We think it's going to be an essential building block of urban mass transit. So that's probably the 20,000-foot flyover on Proterra. We are a generation portfolio company. Thank you very much. You got to pick your investors very carefully. They have to pick you very carefully. But it has been a great partnership. We are truly honored to be part of what Generation is trying to prove out from an investment perspective.
I didn't actually ask you to say that either. Perfect. Look at that.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel.
Okay, we're going to start off relatively small, kind of getting into the minutiae of what Proterra is doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it, and then slowly get more and more complicated with the questions and end up thinking about the visions of how urban transportation is going to look like in the future. So just be prepared. It's going to get more complex as we go along. And I'll try and keep up. I'm horrifically jet lagged, so kind of big caveat.
If it's a really hard question, if one of you would butt in and ask an easier question, I would appreciate that, because it's Thursday night. Joy's accent intimidates me. She's very smart.
Okay, perfect. It's the accent that does it. Okay, so let's start off with the easy kind of questions.
All right.
Why buses and why the US market?
Buses, the explanation's really simple and very analytical. A bus, a diesel bus has some of the worst fuel efficiency of any vehicle on the road. So the average diesel bus in the US market gets about 3.2 miles per gallon. So the only thing that's less efficient than a diesel bus is like a bulldozer or a mining truck or something like that. But in terms of large markets where the vehicles are all over the place, they're ubiquitous, because if you're starting a company or you're bringing a new technology to market, you want to go after big markets, at least $1 billion market. And that way you can be really wrong and still end up with a reasonably sized business. So bus is the least efficient of the mass market big vehicle categories. The other thing about buses that is fantastic from an EV perspective is they drive a lot of miles. So if you're a driver of a car in the US or Europe or Asia, you're probably driving 10 to 12,000 miles a year, unless you're driving professionally as a taxi driver or something like that. A personal car, 10,000 miles a year. We have bus operators that put 60,000 miles per bus on their fleet vehicles. So if you just do the math, a transit bus fleet needs to buy roughly 10,000 gallons of diesel fuel per bus per year. For our cars, personally, we only buy a couple hundred gallons of fuel. So we were looking for markets when we kind of mapped it out that had a really big problem, and that really big problem being the amount of diesel fuel they were buying, because that gave us a sense of how interested they'd be in energy technology. If we'd been starting a lighting company, an LED company, we would have looked for really big light bulbs that were on 24 hours a day. That would have been the market that we would have gone after. Why the US market? That's mainly because we're lazy. It is really hard to do business internationally, and it's really important to be selectively, to prioritize and be selectively lazy as an entrepreneur. Otherwise, if you place chips on a bet and you can't sustain that, or you spread yourself too thin, even if your technology is good and your team's good and you got enough money, you're going to fail. So we were talking about it earlier, especially at this stage of business, my job is about saying no to 99 of the 100 things. I know you've all heard that before, but it just gets harder, because as your business progresses or as your technology proves out, there are more and more good ideas and more inbound emails in terms of things you can do with it. So I'd say we're quite paranoid about messing up as we scale. And anything that looks like it adds degrees of risk, we consider it really carefully. So there are a lot of electric buses to be sold in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe. The only market that we've been brave enough to enter so far is Canada. So in addition to being lazy, we're cowardly. But from a paranoia perspective, we really want to make sure that the next thing we do is the most logical next thing we do.
Okay, perfect. And then if you think about the US context right now, you are clearly gaining market share from incumbents who've been around for decades, who have existing relationships with municipalities, and also a bunch of new entrants which are kind of attempting to knock on the door and have been attempting to knock on the door for a number of years now. What is it exactly about Proterra and the way that you're approaching the problem that allows you to gain this market share?
I think we were fairly neck and neck with the other new entrants into the EV space in 2014, 2015, when we really started to see differentiation in market share. That was when our product really changed in terms of the capability of our product versus our competitors. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how are we going to win? And very quickly we took off the table being the biggest or being the most established. We have competitors that have been around not just for decades, but in some cases more than a century. One of our diesel bus competitors, they have a lapel pin that says 125. So 125 years, I didn't even know that there were diesel engines 125 years ago. Our goal is to not let them have a 150 pin, maybe even not even a 135 pin. But so there's no way we're going to be older. There's no way we're going to know more about where customers like to have steak dinners. We're not going to be bigger. We can't win on price because we're competing against companies out of China as one category companies we compete against. So we're not going to win a pricing battle. So really the only strategy that was left available to us was to have superlative technology. And that coincided well with who we were. When we looked at what people we could add to our company, what investors that we could work with, what career insights we could bring from our own background, you could logically say, I believe that this group of people headquartering the company in Silicon Valley, focusing on the US market, can remain leading edge in terms of technology. So we really focused in on, there's a lot of stuff we're not going to do as good as the other competitors, but we are hands down going to have the best technology. And we define that. So it's easy to say you have the best technology. For us, we wanted to turn it into performance factors. We could go farther on a single charge than another electric bus. We used less energy. Our buses don't break down as often as other people's buses. And then we also wanted to follow that up, not just with great technology, but with great people and service. So our support for our customers, it's by no means perfect, but in terms of hustle, our customers can send me an email Saturday night, and I'll probably get that question or that concern over to our director of service within minutes. That's not necessarily a sustainable way to run your business, but we are really intense about not letting our customers down. And we've shown that now for enough years where our customers are very smart. They know we're the little guy, but they also, they trust us to always have the best technology and to relentlessly support it.
Has there been any kind of very surprising reaction that you've had from customers kind of over this journey over the last couple of years? What has tended to be the reaction from your customers? And is there anything that's been truly surprising or an anecdote?
Yeah, so the thing that we didn't anticipate was sort of a bottoms-up regulatory or strategic push from some of the customers that were early adopters. So you are so used to, in a startup environment, chipping away at a market and just hammering away and trying to get your point across. It almost surprises you when a customer or a market starts agreeing. You're like, wait, did you say electric buses are a good idea? I said electric buses are a good idea. We didn't think you'd believe us. Our first customer, what really surprised us is their board of directors a couple years ago, to our surprise, passed a board level resolution that said by 2030 they want to be 100% electric. 2030 is a long way away from now, but in the urban infrastructure market, buses and trains last 10 to 20 years. So what they were basically saying is they weren't going to buy any more diesel or natural gas buses after 2018. And it was not our idea. And what was interesting is that trend started to get copied. Los Angeles, LA Metro, which is the second largest fleet in the US market, copied Foothill Transit because they were another kind of LA County fleet. And within the course of 2 years, 1/7 of buses in the United States, so roughly 10,000 urban mass transit buses, now have a policy attached to them that they will go fully electric. So it's New York, it's Seattle, it's San Jose, it's San Francisco. And it really was like you push the boulder uphill in a startup environment or a new technology environment. And when it starts rolling away from you down the other side of the hill, sometimes it can roll faster than you expect. So that was probably our biggest surprise. And in some ways, we no longer had the luxury of building a business plan and letting that drive how much we wanted to sell or needed to sell. It now was, we're going to have to build a business that can supply this level of capacity. And that was actually far scarier to figure out.
And I think the thing that's really exciting about Proterra is you always want to find businesses which are on the right side of the cost down curve, right? So there's many businesses in the world that have been totally on the wrong side, have been on the right side of history from the extent that they are doing the right things and it's driving the world towards a better place, but they have been hurt to a certain extent by the cost down curves. So what exactly, can you give a sense as to the kind of the magnitude of the cost down curves that you guys are dealing with right now, and how are you kind of incorporating that and giving yourself an advantage over time?
You know, I think a lot of technologies, you'll look at a plot of cost per some unit of value. So in solar, it was like dollars per watt. On the IT side or the cloud computing side, similar metrics. For driverless vehicles, they're looking at like how much does a LiDAR sensor cost that can do a certain amount of detection. For us, there were probably 2 commodity costs that really mattered. The first one, not surprisingly, is the cost of batteries. And you know, to Joy's point, when you feel like you're on the wrong side of the cost down curve, it is causing you to reduce your prices. When you're on the receiving end in a good way of a cost down curve, it's enabling you to grow your margins. So it basically, is the thing you're selling being valued less by the market? That's what a lot of solar companies went through when solar went through one of the most dramatic cost downs, which was great if you have solar on your house, but not so great if you're trying to build a business by selling solar panels. Batteries have gone through the same thing. If you're a battery company, it's really hard. It means that you do all of your work correctly, the year ends, and the goalpost has moved again. And we've definitely seen this on batteries. 10 years ago, the Department of Energy said if batteries ever get to $350 a kilowatt hour, which is our cost down curve, that's kind of our metric, EVs will make a lot of economic sense. And 10 years ago, people said, that is a crazy idea. There's no way batteries, which at the time were over $1,000 a kilowatt hour, are going to fall 70%. You know, you read these snarky articles where people say, like, batteries aren't Moore's Law and batteries don't get better. Well, batteries got better about 8% a year for 10 years, and now batteries are a few $100s a kilowatt hour. The magnitude for us, I mean, we put 400 or 500 kilowatt hours of batteries on a bus. So take like a Tesla Model S and multiply by 4, and you got a Proterra city bus. So we buy a lot of batteries per bus. This cost down curve reduced the cost of energy storage by a couple $100,000. It's also getting to the point where the energy storage system in a battery electric bus or truck costs the same as a big diesel engine. So when you think about cars are powered by very small, economically efficient engines. Some engines are only a few $1,000, or a few hundred to a few $1,000. A big Cummins diesel engine that goes in a bus or a truck can be $40,000 to $50,000. You can buy a lot of battery now with $40,000 to $50,000. So that helped us out a lot. Lightweight materials, we don't make as big of a deal out of that, or we don't, I guess, lead with that story as much, but carbon fiber and composite, the cost of getting a pound of material out of a vehicle has dropped dramatically. And for us, what that's meant is if you built a steel bus the way a traditional bus company builds it versus the way we build a composite bus, our buses now are 4,000 pounds lighter on a chassis perspective. And to put that in perspective, that's the size of a large sedan. So there's a whole car that's not in our mass now.
Moving on to the more complicated realm of things. So autonomy, as everyone now needs to think about when they're thinking about transportation. if you were to kind of think about it logically, you'd assume that a bus is probably the first thing to go autonomous, right? So they're on defined routes, you're kind of geofenced within a particular area, you're not traveling that fast, although you're very heavy, and you're returning to base every so often. So there's a whole load of kind of factors which make you think that buses should be one of the first things to go autonomous. A, is that true? Do you agree with that? And B, if it is, why aren't more people talking about autonomous buses?
Autonomy is going to have a big impact on urban mobility and urban transit. I don't know that all mass transit vehicles are going to go driverless. And the vehicles that are the most highly utilized are the least likely to go autonomous. And the reason for that is if you have a 40-foot bus in Seattle at rush hour traffic, you've got 90 people on the bus. It's standing room only. Or if you get on BART to go to the East Bay at rush hour, you may not be able to get on the train. So spreading the cost of a human being over 80 to 90 passengers, it's not a cost that our customers care about. I think for first mile, last mile, and microtransit, it matters a lot. Because if there are only 2 or 3 human beings on that vehicle, then the willingness to pay is only 2 or 3 human beings. And so that's why I think for businesses like Uber and Lyft, autonomy is probably existential to figure out, because it's not that economically productive for you to have a job and me to have a job driving you. Like that kind of one-to-one relationship doesn't work so well. But if both of us can do whatever we want for a living and a robot can drive us, that's a lot of economic productivity. My own personal theory on autonomy, and it will be wrong, is that I think the first market that really unlocks autonomy is long-range trucking. And I hate to say this, but I don't know that it's going to be electric trucks, because I think the best market for autonomy is those highways like Highway 80 in the US, where you got trucks just sitting in the right lane. My folks live in Utah, so we pile our kids in the car and we drive from the Bay Area to Utah, and you get out in the middle of nowhere, and it's just trucks and parents who are cheap enough not to buy airline tickets. So, and when you're sitting in your car and there are trucks in the right lane, and you've got snowboards and skis and everything else, and kids asking, are we there yet? You would prefer that those trucks were in almost a dedicated ballarded lane. It's not a lot of fun to pass an 18-wheeler or be passed by an 18-wheeler. Also, if you look at the road grid, and this might be a little bit nerdy of an observation, but there's more surface streets, or there's more surface road, i.e. there's more terrain that you need to map in the city of New York on surface streets than the entire Eisenhower highway system. So we've experimented with autonomy. We've got a pilot going in Reno, Nevada. We're talking to a couple cities in Texas who are going to be sort of autonomous sandboxes. And one of the things we've learned is snapping the vehicle to a precise location takes a lot of computing power. If you could take that off the table, like you were saying about fixed routes, that lowers the challenge of autonomy a lot. So I'm definitely with you on the idea that level 4, which is the vehicle is fully capable, but it can't go everywhere, I think that's where autonomy goes first, because there's just a massive amount of brain power in the car needed if you're in the urban canyon, which means you're cut off from the GPS signal. So the way I think it'll work is that highways, we should be putting in some sort of sensor every quarter mile or so, sort of like those reflectors or rumble strips. We spend $1 trillion on roads, so what's the, not that big of a deal to put in a sensor every quarter mile. Sort of like the old video game Pac-Man, that would tell the truck, this is exactly where I am. The other reason I think trucking will happen first is if you crash with an autonomous truck that's full of cargo, you don't kill anyone. In my market, we move the most valuable cargo there is. We move human beings, and we move all kinds of human beings. We move little kids, we move disabled passengers, we move intoxicated passengers, we move people who want to attach a bike to the bike rack in the front of the vehicle. It's such a crazy world out there. We move people who have pets that shouldn't be on the bus. So versus, like, I could see trucking, if you're just going to load it full of Amazon Prime boxes, I think that's a much lower risk case. So my view is if autonomy is going to work, it's going to work first in the easy environment, which is a highway where you're going 55 miles an hour. Figuring this out with autonomy, given like the chaos that is mass transit in London or San Francisco, personally, and I could be totally wrong, I think it's the last thing we solve from a software problem.
Autonomous buses are out, but autonomy is for now. Let's just assume from an ease of conversation perspective. Let's put that aside for now.
There'll definitely be a lot of autonomous tech in buses, but I don't know, pulling the drivers completely from urban transit, I think is going to be hard.
Okay. So autonomy will clearly have an effect to a certain degree on the viability of buses, or so many people are going to claim, right? So the autonomous fleets out there, the kind of scooter sharing, all the kind of new mobility forms that are coming out are essentially baked on this promise that the dollar per kilometer is going to go drastically down, and that's why it makes sense. And it goes so drastically down that it ends up potentially threatening mass transit and buses and everything else. So I guess the kind of question is, what role is there to play for buses in mass transit if you were to kind of believe that narrative?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's important to remember about that narrative is if the cost per mile drops, the drivers of that cost down will affect everything in transportation. So if in the sort of urban or in the autonomous scenario, electric vehicles work, autonomy works, we no longer have accidents, we no longer have insurance, there's a lot of economic productivity that's unlocked. Cost comes down per mile. I think that is what's going to happen. I think in that world, though, the per mile cost of operating a bus drops dramatically as well. And so I think you still have market segments. So you will still have someone who runs a hedge fund in New York who takes a helicopter to the Hamptons. That would be probably the top end of the market. And then you still are going to have a community college student who gets a free mass transit pass as a subsidized benefit to help with college enrollment. And those types of benefits exist today. We talk about things like transportation poverty, and we tend to solve transportation poverty by subsidizing some forms of transit. So I hope we end up in a world that's exactly as you describe, but where we don't completely privatize all forms of transport. I hope mass transit gets so cheap on a per mile basis that we no longer collect fares. If we got rid of fare boxes and clipper cards and all that, your cycle time would be faster. My view for how electric buses and electric trains, which we don't make, would work in cities is sort of the way the moving sidewalk works at a big airport. Moving sidewalk doesn't make a lot of sense as an investment unless a lot of people are going to go the same direction. That's kind of how high-capacity vehicles work. High-capacity vehicles are a really dumb idea unless we're all going to the same place. And then they're the only way that we reduce congestion. They're also the only way where we can board and off-board thousands of people per minute at major transit centers. So I don't believe that mass transit becomes the only thing that moves people in cities. I think at some point in the future, the electric buses will sort of be like the moving sidewalk. I think they'll be in the downtown area of the city. I think bus schedules will go away, because who needs a bus schedule if buses are so cheap that every 5 minutes at a major intersection, an electric autonomous bus comes along. All that being said, you'll have scooters. You'll have autonomous Uber and Lyft-like services. You might have Uber Elevate, the vertical takeoff and landing helicopter. I guarantee my customers will not be able to afford to use Uber Elevate. There are segments to markets, and flying is probably going to remain a luxury. But I don't think I guess one of the things I've learned about moving people in cities is there is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all. So when we talk to technology companies, and they're like, I have this black box, and this black box solves mobility in cities, we generally assume they haven't spent much time in cities.
Mobility is my favorite thing, so I'll stop geeking out on mobility and thinking about how the world could end up looking like in a couple of years, and go back to running a business and the advice that you have for everyone here. So let's start off with, from your perspective, what is the hardest thing about selling, manufacturing, and then shipping the buses? What's the hardest thing that you guys need to do?
Supply chain management. That is, when we get hit with volatility in terms of operations, it almost always comes through supply chain. And so it is not as simple as, well, we should have great buyers and we should have great procurement people. It really starts with strategy in design. So if your engineering group designs something and the only cap that will fit on this bottle is this green cap and it comes from a crappy company, your designers have set you up for failure. And the factory, because we have to manufacture, the factory floor and the supply chain organization, they are sort of the end of the whip that gets cracked. So the gut-wrenching feeling as a CEO or head of engineering is when the problem is manifesting, like the supplier who ships that part is an awful supplier. So the yield on the parts is low or they're late, which I don't understand how you do that. You were supplying a business and you're like, sorry, I was supposed to ship you 8, I shipped 4. I'm sure you'll get through it. You know, when our customers are Chicago or New York, like they are not that sympathetic when we're like, we got short shipped. So it's probably another way of saying the thing I appreciated the least before this job and appreciate the most now is how the supply chain of a hardware business is like the circulatory system. And when it's flowing, when things are flowing, like everything's good. But it only takes like one blockage and things get unhealthy really fast. So if I've got bad news and it's operationally related, it's almost always a supplier. And the thing that feels the worst is when you can't, there's nothing you can do to get that supplier to grow up and do their job. You can't buy their company. The VP you used to talk to transferred to another division. And you talk to engineering and they're like, it takes a couple months to design that part out. So you're just going to slog through it for a few months.
And you're one of the kind of rare breeds of Silicon Valley companies that are doing a lot of hardware, surprisingly enough. So with that kind of like uniqueness in mind, what advice would you give to anybody who is starting quite a capital-intensive or hardware-related business?
It's going to take more capital than you think. It's going to be harder than starting a services or software business. But if you get it done, the barriers to entry will be higher. Response time for both you and your competitors will be slower, so you can afford probably to be a little late if you get it right. I don't think you can afford to be late if you're in software. So there's generally something bad about every business, or there's something that someone hates about their business. And so the hard stuff about hardware is the capital intensity, the fact that mistakes tend to be locked in pretty solid. I think on the software side, though, the problem that you have is because it's easy to start software businesses, if you have a good idea, you better scale really fast, or you're Groupon and you have 1,100 competitors. So the thing we have going for us at Proterra is no matter how good I make it sound tonight, and I'm really trying to make it sound great, I really doubt anyone here is going to be like, I listened to Ryan from Proterra, I'm going to start an electric bus business. So I don't worry about fast followers. I mean, I know who our competitors are. I don't know. We may make it sound so good that people show up on Sand Hill Road saying, like, I want to start an electric bus company. But I don't think companies like Tesla, for example, are going to be effectively chased. If you can thread the needles to become a hardware company that builds a physical product, those are really high barriers to entry. But it's a long slog. And
do you also think that extends to your incumbents as well? So the incumbents that you're going up against, are they also facing that similar issue when it's very capital intensive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're facing a software incumbent, they can make a relatively minor bet to pilot to see if what you have introduced is something that they should enable as a feature on their platform. Our competitors, some of our diesel bus competitors, are still not sure that this electric vehicle thing makes much sense. We reviewed an investor presentation from one of our competitors, and of their strategic priorities, like EV was number 6. They're like, God bless you. Just maybe it should be 7. I mean, 6 seems aggressive. But our incumbents have to make 9-figure bets, and they have to make a bet that they can't really unwind. From a product perspective, if you start marketing that you're going to do zero-emission vehicles, catches on a little bit, like you'll sell a product, you'll have to support it. So I tend to think of our competitors as very big ships, very slow to turn. However, by the time they've turned, we better have our act together. Like we've got to be at product market fit. We have to have a superior cost structure. We cannot be acting like a startup. So they're slowly coming around. And There's a great podcast I was listening to a couple weeks ago about Netflix versus Blockbuster, and the quote from the CEO of Netflix was, actually he was thinking about competing with HBO at the time, and he said, we have to produce content, i.e. we have to become HBO before HBO can set up a Netflix website. So we got to know how to do what they do before they figure out how to do what we do. And I think when you're the new technology, that's absolutely the case.
One final question, and then I'll open it up to everyone else. You personally are also another rare breed. So at Generation, kind of when we're twiddling our thumbs and slightly bored to a certain extent, we always joke that you see so many former executives and founders who end up having great exits and then becoming very, very successful investors. And it is really rare to think about an investor who ends up becoming a successful entrepreneur. It may be because the investor has figured out that it's easier being the investor and they kind of stick to their guns and stay there, or fundamentally they have no tangible skills. There's also that element. People are going to kill me for saying that. Why do you think that is? Why did you end up going back to the operational side of things? And why do you think that transition from investor back into operator doesn't happen that often?
They are different skill sets. And I think if you go far enough in investing, it probably is pretty hard to learn to be a general manager. And there are a lot of subtleties to it. One aspect of being a general manager, which I think is hard for people who have been career investment bankers or consultants and then buy-side investors, is they are surprised to learn that not everyone at an operating company went to Harvard or Stanford. That some of the brilliance of leaders in companies is about how they're able to get a diversity of talent and a diversity of IQ. Like even in Silicon Valley companies, not everyone who works at your company is a genius. In fact, you're in trouble if that's the case. So I do find that investors are definitely used to talking to other brilliantly educated, very analytical, very structured, but that's not the real world. The real world is a supplier named Lou, or it's a supplier. This actually happened during the World Cup. We had a supplier in another country, and they could not get their team to come, not their soccer team, their factory team would not come to work because their team was like in the finals. And I was like, look, I try to anticipate every risk, and I was so pissed off at myself because I was like, oh, World Cup risk. Why do the wiring harnesses come from Mexico? We're screwed. And we had to have a pause because you don't want hungover workers. So we're like, look, when they do come back, send them home for a day or two, lots of fluids, and then have them come back and do our wiring harnesses. My career, I haven't spent a lot of time in the investing world. I was at Kleiner for 4 years, but I've been working for the last 20. So 20% of my time I was a buy-side investor. I really enjoyed it. It was fascinating to know how the enemy thinks. And it was an important thing for me to learn because one of the most stressful things as a CEO or an entrepreneur is capitalization. Because in some ways, it hangs in the balance, and then you and your partners go back to this room, and then we get the email or the call, and it's a good email or a bad email. But understanding, just being able to empathize with what investors are going through and what they are trying to find and what risks they'll tolerate and what they won't, that's been helpful. But I think if you talk to some of my former colleagues at Kleiner, it wouldn't surprise them, I bet, that I would end up back in operations. I went from an operations role at Tesla over to Kleiner. I think they knew there was something a little off because they gave me a nice office on my own. And I got lonely within the first 6 hours. So I'd wander over and I'd be like, hey, Dave, what are you working on? He's like, go back to your office and come up with an idea. So I also, within the portfolio, I would tend to want to adopt the patient. So we'd have a portfolio company that had a problem, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll fly down there or work with the team. We can figure this out. And then I'd have to remember, I've got to go back to Kleiner. And I would feel a little sad, we figured out this problem, and the team's going to go out and celebrate tonight, and I got to go back to work. So I really enjoy teams. That's when I have the most fun, is when something happens and you can get a group of people together and figure it out. And I enjoy leading teams through stuff that's hard. I feel it's almost like a challenge where you're yeah, no, that's a sucky situation, but that's not the suckiest situation we've gotten through. So I like doing that kind of stuff.
Okay, perfect. Any questions?
Sure.
I'll walk around. Oh, here, I can do my
Sure.
Thank you so much for the enlightenment. You talked about the very different challenges between hardware and software company. When you go through those growth cycles, when do you make the decision of what do you focus on, hardware or software? And when is that inflection point where you just go away from partnering and bring it in, make versus buy, this like, oh, we do it all ourselves, which could be a boondoggle.
Yeah. Well, we don't do everything ourselves. We buy a lot of stuff. Like, we don't build our own electric motors. We generally build something out of necessity. So if something's already a commodity, we're going to buy it because you're not going to beat the cost structure of a commodity. We also don't want to take technology risk if we don't have to. So if we make something on our own, even if it's something as simple as a charging cable, you know the first couple that you make aren't going to work that well. So if we can buy something and it's already been scaled by someone else, we'll buy it. We are having to develop more and more software. So I think we're actually pulling in some of the software where we're leaning on other companies for, because it unlocks more hardware capability. We've bitten off more than we can chew at times. So we try to make the decision as reluctantly as possible. But if it's something where it's going to give your product a head and shoulders competitive advantage over someone else, if you literally can't unlock the innovation without building some piece of it yourself, and if you can capitalize it and you can build the team to do it, that people question is probably the biggest one. When we insourced modules, so initially we built packs by buying off-the-shelf modules. Then we decided we had to build the modules themselves. We bought commodity energy storage from cell level and then built up to modules. The only reason we were confident we could do it is we knew exactly the people we were going to hire to do it. But if we had grabbed a group of smart engineers, brought them in a room together and said, I need you to figure out this new thing, and they'd never done it before, that probably would have ended badly.
So obviously with a diesel bus, the energy is generated within the bus, and with an electric bus, it's generated somewhere else. How much more efficient is the energy generated, I guess, in a power plant than a traditional diesel bus? And then where would a hybrid bus fit within that spectrum?
Yeah, so the way we generally talk about it to the market is at the power plant level in the vehicle. Diesel bus is like 3.2 miles per gallon, and if you switch to CNG, you've switched fuel, but you're still roughly the same thermal efficiency. Hybrid's about 5 miles per gallon, and the EVs are anywhere from 16 to 23 mile per gallon. So you're picking up a 4 to 5x differential at the drivetrain level. If you are running on a kind of thermal or fossil-only grid, power plant efficiency is anywhere from 40 to 60%, and then you lose some distribution in the wires. But a big diesel engine in a city bus is probably only 20% efficient. So on a well-to-wheel basis, for most of our customers, we're about an 80% greenhouse gas reduction. 100% coal-fired grid is definitely the worst case scenario. A grid mix like California is really good, and we encourage a lot of our customers to figure out what the non-renewable portion is of their grid mix, and then contract or PPA for that as well. So our long-term vision is that when you look at state-level markets that are going to 100% renewable or net zero carbon, we think that electricity is going to be the lowest cost form or lowest carbon form of energy. In most of our markets, it's already winning significantly over oil or gas. Like Pacific Northwest, that's probably the market we should electrify the fastest in the US. It's like hydro, wind, a little bit of coal, but their carbon footprint per electric mile is almost nothing. Other areas, there's certainly parts of TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, where you've got a lot more coal on the grid, so your GHG benefit's not as good.
Hi, thanks first of all, for donating your time. Appreciate it. Question for Ryan, which I might want to ask Joy to plug her ears for. About working with VCs, because you've been on both sides of the fence. For those of us here tonight that may be raising money, working with a VC, or hope to working with several VCs, what methods would you suggest, other than having two competitive VCs trying to make a deal with you? What other methodologies might you suggest to help retain more equity than otherwise might be the case in a negotiation process? Yeah,
competition is normally the best thing you can do in any situation. don't ever let VCs know who they are. So, and even those most like minor hints, they'll figure it out. I think a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate how incestuous the venture capital world is. And so there's a lot of stuff you can't do as a public equity investor. Like the SEC will not let you do that. But in private capital markets, it's kind of the Wild West. So there's no formula for getting a VC round done. And sometimes things that can happen in the macro that completely derail your funding round and has nothing to do with you. Or you could be in a specific category. Like, can you imagine if you were in Theranos category? Like, you could have 10 term sheets on the table. No one's going to answer your call, at least for a couple months after that scandal breaks. So sometimes stuff happens. You have no control over it. I think one of the things that tells you is don't spend a long time raising capital. If you've got a credible term sheet from a credible VC, close the deal and move on with your business. I mean, definitely hire a good attorney. Make sure that like the terms are legit. But I do see, especially in these markets right now, they're really frothy. I'll get calls from founders or CEOs who are like, well, I got this one term sheet from this awesome firm, but I think I could get like the pre-money a little higher from this other firm. I'm like, you're crazy. Like the Dow could go from 25,000 to 15,000 tomorrow and you will have 0 term sheets. So lock it in, get back to work because you're out of money in 3 months. But the most dangerous thing you can do, especially in Silicon Valley or Sand Hill Road, this would never happen in London. But if a VC figures out who else is looking at your deal, they will call each other. And they'll literally like collude. And you're like, I don't think that's fair, but it's not illegal. So they'll be like, how are you thinking about this? Oh, I'm thinking 50 million pre, and I want a 2x. And all of a sudden, both of the term sheets, or one of them will back out, let the other one lead, and then join their term sheet later. So be really careful. You definitely need to keep a stalking horse in process, and you need to keep it secret. If a VC thinks they're competing with another VC, when they have good relationship with that VC, and they often are clubbed together in a lot of deals, they'll just call them up. Be like, I'm trying to figure out how to win this deal with Proterra. Oh, I have an idea for how to do that. I'll back out, you win. So get the deal done. Time kills all deals. I'm probably a little bit depression era about that because I was at Tesla when the Great Recession hit, and we had a term sheet on $100 million financing, and it was just gone. And we're, it's sort of like when a firm rescinds offers during a recession, and you can tell that firm, this is really going to hurt your reputation in the job market. And they're like, what job market? So, it is not over till they wire.
Okay, hi, my name is Agneta Rosenberg, and I really enjoy this conversation. I had sort of a follow-up on the efficiency. So I work somewhat in the building and smart building or building efficiency. So like in the United States or pretty much worldwide, 40% of electricity or energy is used in buildings. So, but I don't know what's that for buses. If we switched everything to electric buses, how much better would that be? And then if you can say something about buses versus trains.
Yeah, so I took a train to get here tonight, and I'm glad I was able to take a train because it went underground. And so if you can take the train, and this is coming from someone who makes buses, if you can take an underground or an elevated train, take that, you'll get here faster. The problem is trains, or not the problem, the reality is trains are the heaviest infrastructure hammer we can hit the problem with. So you're looking at $100 million for 10 miles of train project. When you look at the developing world, a lot of systems are built with buses, not because of desire, but because of necessity or scarcity. So Brazil in particular, Brazil moves millions of people with rail-like efficiency, but they do it with buses that are basically operating on the cadence and frequency of rail. So I'm a huge fan of multimodal systems. In my mind, the bus is sort of like the middle child of transit. Like it holds everybody together, often neglected, doesn't get, it's a little underappreciated. And I have 3 kids, so I try to take good care of my middle child. But bus is a very humble form of transportation, but if you just need like a no-nonsense, lowest dollar per mile, move someone from point A to point B, and it's imperfect, That's a bus. If you're going to spend $1 billion, then you could do like an electric monorail, and that'll be really sexy. But if you don't have the money or the time for sexy, you're probably going to do a bus. In terms of electrical impact, and by the way, buses are way better than cars because of the fact that you can put 70 cars worth of people into one bus. But if everybody's going to different places, they're probably not even going to take a bus. In terms of electricity, the bus uses 2 kilowatt hours a mile. And on average, in the US, a bus goes 130 miles a day, and there are 70,000 buses. So if we convert the whole sector, that would give you your daily gigawatt hours. What we generally hear from the utilities is they have plenty of generation. They don't necessarily have enough distribution at the local level, but they're more afraid of these lights going to LED and of solar and of falling demand than they are of increasing demand. So I hope that electric transportation adds load onto the grid and lowers cost per kilowatt hour for everyone. I'm a firm believer in electrify everything, in that I think as much of our stuff, whether it's heat pumps, LED lighting, the less stuff we burn, the more energy efficient we're going to be.
Right. Following up on that, quick question for you. 5 years from now, are you making only electric buses, or are you doing other vehicles as well?
I don't think we're going to build other vehicles ourselves, but buses are technically Class 8 trucks. School buses are Class 7 trucks. It's just a bus carries a lot of people instead of a lot of cases of beer or potato chips. So it's a truck that's optimized for people as the cargo. So from a regulatory perspective and a technical requirement perspective, the systems we've developed could go into trucks, garbage trucks, school buses as well. I don't think we have much applicability in light-duty vehicles. I think our stuff is too big and probably over-spec'd for small stuff.
So you go into those markets with a partner.
Yes.
Versus yourself.
Yeah, we've announced 2 partnership programs, one with Van Hool out of Belgium and one with Alexander Dennis out of the UK. Van Hool is going to build like a luxury style bus that they use for tour buses, and they use a lot of them around here for employee shuttles. They call them coaches because coach sounds fancier than bus. We'll be putting the same style battery packs into their coaches that we do into our city buses. And then with Alexander Dennis, they're bringing a double-decker bus, the iconic English bus, to the US, but they're going to do it as an electric. So they'll build the bus, we'll build the packs, because we generally don't think we can take on the capital intensity of any other vehicles. No. So I think we'll help those companies with probably their minimum viable product, and I hope they'll get confident enough around electric that rather than repurposing their existing chassis, they'll do what we did eventually and go all in on electric.
I'm just curious if you know anything about the reduction of noise pollution.
I think that's a really big one in terms of the movement of or the movement from internal combustion to EV. I didn't appreciate it as much when I worked at Tesla because the cars we competed against were relatively small engines and they were really well built. So we benchmarked against Mercedes and BMW and Audi, and those cars are really quiet given that they're combustion cars. But if you go outside on a city street and like a garbage truck roars past you or a delivery truck or a bus, it's deafening. It's because it's a really big engine and the R&D that's gone into buses and trucks is nowhere near what's gone into a BMW sedan. I personally think the worst sort of experience of being in a city is the result of the heavy-duty vehicles in the cars. It smells, like it's noisy, everybody's honking at each other. Like cities that have less internal combustion and just less cars, period, are much better cities. So what we're seeing is the passengers inside the vehicles are having a more pleasant experience. To use a very tangible example, we responded to an RFP for a US city, and they had a specification that at the rear of the bus, if you're sitting all the way at the back where the engine would be, the passenger can't experience anything higher than 89 decibels. And if you look on a decibel scale, I don't know what that compares to. I don't know if that's a jackhammer or a lawnmower or a jet engine. Yeah, I mean, it's bad. It's not like a Metallica concert, but if you sat in the back of that bus, what's that? Oh, it is? Okay. It would, if you rode around in that bus the whole day or every day, you'd probably suffer degraded hearing. So you might not get an earache, but like your hearing, if you're the driver Or if you ride the bus every day, your hearing would suffer from that. And then externally, I'm probably more sensitive to it because I work at an electric bus company, but we were in Park City, Utah, and we were sitting out at a cafe talking to the city team about electric buses. Beautiful day, blue sky, and this diesel bus roared by and just like dumped soot on us. And it was just this roaring, and I was like, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you over the sound of your bus. And so I think this is going to be a big thing. I know that some of the managers in LA consider noise pollution the next thing they want to work on after air pollution. So I'm an idealist about it, but like I think it's going to be a really good future 10, 15 years from now. Like if you think about New York City eliminating 6,000 high horsepower diesel engines, that's a deafening amount of ambient noise that would just be gone.
So the smoking bans in bars got a quick push on the regulatory front when a bunch of server unions sued the bars and the hospitality industry for lung cancer. They said, you allow smoking in the workplace of our union members, you are killing your employees, pay up. Do you think there might be something similar with electric buses and the bus drivers union? I mean, like you're making your employees, our union members, deaf or get lung cancer from diesel fume inhalation.
I've talked a lot tonight about sort of the unexpected bad things that happen in a business, but also there are things that happen where an opportunity opens up, and it's not because you're good at your job, you're just lucky. And you have to take advantage of that situation, and you have to recognize how big of an opportunity something can be when a macro or policy tailwind hits your business. For us, the morning we woke up and saw headlines worldwide that the largest car manufacturer in the world had been systematically cheating on tailpipe emissions, we were like, we're going to have to build a lot of buses. And it really changed the conversation with all of the cities we were working with and changed the level of international engagement in terms of partners waking up and realizing if they caught VW for this, they might go after me next, or I don't know if I can trust my engine manufacturer. So what we're seeing is things like American Transit Workers Union, I think it's ATU, they know about the level of fugitive emissions that end up back in the vehicles. School buses, that one's just, I think that's a ticking time bomb. Like diesel emissions are the worst urban pollutant you could expose human beings to, and our primary mode of transportation for our most sensitive human beings, we move them in a diesel school bus, and some of those diesel school buses are like 20 years old. And you can smell the diesel inside the vehicle, and we move the kids 5 days a week, 9 months a year. So I don't know if it's going to be parent-teachers associations or school teachers, but right now there's something like $10 billion of funding in the US market alone that is a settlement that VW has to provide spread out across the 50 states. A lot of those states are choosing to take some of that money and monitor air quality or replace city buses and school buses. But it's funny, I was thinking earlier, it was literally earlier today, and I thought, I wonder if we're going to get to the point where internal combustion exhaust, or just generally commercially generated exhaust, has the same sort of social view as cigarettes. Like, if we were having this meeting 20 years ago, the person next to you might light up, but right now, especially in San Francisco, if somebody lit up right next to you, everybody would be like, that's crazy, I'm not going to inhale your cigarette. That's true. But when you go to other countries, sometimes you'll be in the developing world and you're like, oh my God, everyone still smokes. Or Europe. I wonder, that's, especially now, they seem to be carving up pretty fast. That's a fair point. I shouldn't generalize.
I would say that in Norway got very different.
That's true, and they're big fans of EVs. So I love Norway and Sweden. No, but I do wonder, when I have grandkids or great grandkids, I do wonder at some point, are we gonna get to a point where people are like, you did what in cities? Because I think right now, if I installed my own potbelly stove at my home in the Bay Area and fed coal briquettes into it, and I explained to my neighbor that it's my freedom to do this, they'd be like, that's nuts, you're gonna kill us all. But right now, I could drive a Hummer fired up in my driveway, running on diesel, and just blow diesel all over my neighborhood. And it's my God-given right to make your air quality awful. So.
Can I follow up with that?
You probably should save me from that.
No, I am Swedish, but I lived in the United States for 60 years, so But anyway, so when my kids were going to school in Chicago, and you had all those school buses sitting around the entire, I couldn't even go and take my kids into the school. It was so bad. And no one ever thinks about turning the damn thing off. You apparently can turn the diesel engine off the easily. So this would be my thing. In Sweden, you can only do idle engine idle for 1 minute.
Yeah.
That's a law. And actually, there's a law here too. You can't do it more than 10 minutes. So I would ask very gently to people who, on the winter maybe. Anyway, I'm just saying too much, but I would ask them sometimes, please consider turning your engine off when you're sitting in front of them.
I mean, the understanding of emissions is changing so much. Right out of college, I was in the U.S. Army, and I was a tank officer. We knew so little, or there just was so little awareness around sort of health and safety that when we would work with the infantry platoons, they would stand behind our tanks to warm up. So it's like an 1,100 horsepower diesel turbine engine that's blowing, and it was like a hairdryer. But you'd pop the hatch. You'd be like, guys, we gotta go. Like, get. But they would stand in the exhaust, and sometimes they'd stand in the exhaust and smoke. Like,
You don't care about the thing coming out the back end of the engine.
No, and also they were cold. So they were like, I mean, but it was like, yeah, I mean, the tank was the warmest thing to stand next to, especially if you stood in the exhaust stream. Yeah, and we'd come back from the field, and some of the infantry platoons just reeked of diesel exhaust, but they were cold. So, but I mean, so there's probably some like contingent health claims that the Department of Veterans Affairs will be be with. But like the awareness level around emissions, I think it's kind of tip of the iceberg. I mean, we don't even have air quality monitors out there in terms of what we're breathing.
I think we're going to wrap it up here on that wonderful note. That's okay with you guys. Please give Ryan and Joy a big round of applause. Thanks a lot. And are we going to have you guys stick around for a few more minutes? Is that something you're amicable to? Cool. Well, then you'll have a chance to throw your questions at him a little bit more. And with that said, we have a few more cheesy traditions, so please do stick around. One of the first ones is that really at the end of the day, this is your community. And so one of the really great things you can do here is to give and ask for help. And one of the ways we can do that is around the end, is to give anyone who feels like it 10, 15 seconds to say one way you can help somebody here, or one way you can help everybody here. And this is now not the chance to talk about getting 10% off your $15,000 coaching package or what have you. This is a chance to legitimately say, here's how I'm going to offer you a hand, not a discount. So if that is you, what I would like to do is catch my eye, give me your hand. I'll come around, hold the mic, and you'll say what's your name and how you can help, or how you might be looking for help. So, anybody got something they want to start with? You guys are also welcome to ask. Awesome. Lindsay.
Hey guys, I'm Lindsay. If anyone is trying to plan your first event and you need some tips or pointers, you can feel free to talk to me after this or email me.
She put this and all the other ones together. Pretty awesome stuff. Anyone else? Hand in hand. Cool.
Hi, everyone. Myself and Larry over there, raise your hand. We're chapter directors for Startup Grind Berkeley. So if you want to do this in Berkeley or go get your stuff highlighted, let us know. Also, my firm does a lot of work to connect startups and also provide resources, not selling anything. So if you want anything here before you leave for home, especially if you're a foreign founder, let me know. Because myself, I'm Korean, but I was born in Japan. I'm passionate to help foreign founders. Yeah.
Awesome. One thing I'll say is if you are writing about crypto or would like to learn more about crypto, especially marketing side, you can talk to me. I've run an agency on this for a long time. I will jam with you on anything marketing. I'm a huge nerd about it. Any last ones? All right, cool. Well, we got one more. All right, cool. Finish up strong on this one.
Hey guys, my name's Nabil. If she's giving marketing tips, I will provide marketing space. So don't worry about anything. If you guys need to connect or We're just around the corner too, work-wise, 149 New Montgomery.
Yeah, I think one of my buddies actually just got set up around here. Pretty sweet. And then there is one last thing, and this is how we'll end the night. And then we can stick around here until about what, 9? 8:30. Yeah, we don't want to keep Lindsay for too long here. Our founder Derek Anderson, guy that started this whole thing, a box of pizzas out of a back office, he called it a bunch of loser founders trying to make it. But he had one motto that has stayed true ever since, which is, if you've come to one of these and you leave without making a friend, then you failed. And so now's a really wonderful time to look to your left, look to your right, shake a hand, say hello, ask how you can help. All right, enjoy the rest of the time here.